finished the interrogator school and went to the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California. And I learned Arabic. I spent a year and a half studying Arabic 6-7 hours a day, or 8 sometimes, 5 days a week, 63 weeks. I was never happier in my life to finish school than when I finished the Arabic school. And half of my instructors were Iraqis. And the build-up to the Iraq War was happening while I was a student. And one of my instructors, who kind of became a second mother to me, she had lots of family in Baghdad. And so when the shock and awe campaign took place, we would see bombs coming down on Baghdad, and she had family that was living there. And I had other people who were my instructors that were from Ramadi and Tikrit and Fallujah. And so we're watching Baghdad get blown to smithereens. And the people who are from that city and have families still there are the ones who were teaching me Arabic. I thought, what in the world is wrong with the world? I was in this place where I kind of was going back and forth, almost on a week-to-week basis, where on the one hand, I'm thinking, this is a really messed up situation. I don't understand what's going on. I don't think I can be a part of this. But on the other hand, the military brat inside of me, and the guy who wants to succeed at things, says, I'm in this, I don't have an alternate solution, I'm going to do this for all it's worth, I'm going to go special forces. And so I kept on going back and forth of like, I have to do this well, I don't know if I can do this at all. And I talked to a lot of soldiers where a very similar kind of mentality will sometimes happen for people that are struggling with the ethics of the situation. They're either saying, I'm here, I can't change it, I'm gonna go, all the way, or I'm gonna ditch. And this was a really tense time for me. And I started going to church a lot more often and trying to talk through some of these issues with my local priest. And I had the opportunity of actually going to a theology conference in Seattle and meeting Stanley Hauerwas, the guy who my friends were studying with. And I was able to talk with him at this conference. And he gave such a compelling argument of what it would mean, perhaps, of a person or a community that's based upon conscience, that identifies itself out of conviction. And truth, conviction itself, is its own guarantee. And and if you believe in something, proof of your belief is not having to resort to things like coercion in order to make it so, in order to make it more true. And there was something about what he said to me that was resonating with experiences that I had in the military. I'm going to test my convictions, and I'm going to leave my radical political and theological literature at home. I'm going to follow my orders. I'm going to go to Iraq. I'm going to do the best that I can. And maybe I'm going to figure out how to be a chaplain to future soldiers. I'm going to experience what war is like firsthand so that I know how to be a spiritual guide in those circumstances. So I went to Iraq. And we readied for a convoy at the Baghdad International Airport, the convoy that was going to take us from the airport to Abu Ghraib. And I was the only person to raise my hand when the question was asked, who's never done this before? Everyone who was in this convoy had already done armored convoys before, and so I was the only person who hadn't done it. And this steel jaw comes through the crowd, and he says, when you move your selector lever from safe to semi, you're shooting to kill. Silence is what followed that command. The books that I'd read, the things that had moved my conscience to get to the point of questioning war, things like liberty, democracy, even courage, something as maybe as immediate as the idea of courage. None of that went through my head for the next 20 minutes. The only thing that went through my head when we loaded the convoy, and when I pointed my M16 at the bed of our 2-ton armored truck, my finger is alongside the trigger, my thumb is on the selector lever, that if I move it from safe to semi, means that I'm shooting to kill. The only thing that went through my mind was, Who's on the side of the road? Who's on the top of that hill? Watch the roadside brush. It was instinct. It was the instinct of training. War is not fought by or for ideas. It's fought by individual persons who possess human will. Liberty and democracy was not to the forefront of my mind when I took the 20-minute ride from the Baghdad International Airport to Abu Ghraib. Nothing went through my mind. I can count on one hand, maybe, the number of people who I interrogated that had done really heinous things, had been doing the kinds of things that you think, terrorists do. The rest of the time that I was there, I was interrogating schoolboys, young fathers, imams, veterans of previous Iraqi wars. I was the main interrogator once of 5 breadwinners who had been taken from one home. In a patriarchal wartime economy, that could have easily spelled death for the family members of these 4 men, one of whom was an elderly paralytic. The other people were women and children in the home. I was interrogating people like you and me. And those are the people that when you turn on the evening news are being called terrorists and insurgents. The terrible thing of what's happening right now, one of the terrible things, because the whole thing is madness, is the people who committed the atrocities at Abu Ghraib, the American soldiers, they're also just like you and me. They didn't go to monster school, and they don't have like evil creeping in their hearts. I've been doing a lot of speaking since I got out of the Army, and one of the questions I was recently asked at an event at Berkeley was, what separates you as a conscientious objector from a person who goes on to commit atrocities? And I said, time and luck. What I knew as a conscientious objector was simply that I had the propensity for evil. I had the possibility of becoming somebody who did things that was terrible. The people that were picking up RPGs in the streets of Baghdad, they were once you and me. The people that committed the atrocities, they were once you and me. The CO is the person who says, I don't want to become that person because I know that I'm no different than anyone else. But I simply want to say no to the enterprise of war, to the enmity that is created by the politics of war, so that I can save myself from becoming that kind of a person. In the application for conscientious objection, you have to show there's a term, it's called the crystallization of conscience. You have to describe when your conscience crystallized and you knew that you were a conscientious objector. My crystallization of conscience moment happened in an interrogation with a self-proclaimed jihadist. It's a man from Saudi Arabia who came to Iraq. He told me he came to Iraq to fight jihad. And the beginning of this interrogation was pretty verbally hostile. Very tense. It was a very tense interrogation. And it was my first time talking with him. This is about 5 months into my time in Iraq. And I'd grown very weary of aggressive interrogation. And I don't mean that in the sense of what you saw on the Scandal. But there was nothing CNN-worthy, really, that happened while I was there. All of the cameras of the world had been pointed on us, and so our unit was the unit that dressed to the nines and followed procedure. A lot of that activity went elsewhere, and there's a lot of really credible investigative journalism that's covering that right now. And it's all true, I just want to let you know. Anyways, back to this story. This jihadist sat on the other side of the table from me, and I asked him, if there was a knife between you and I, would you pick it up and kill me? Or would you try to play your cards more safely and try to get released? You can go back, join your comrades, and fight jihad. And he told me he'd have to think about it. And so here I am sitting next to a guy who basically just told me that he'd kill me. And the conversation changed tenor really quickly. And I don't really know how it happened. I don't know if I was just weary of the animosity and I wanted to change topics, or if just something existed between the two of us, but we started talking about ethics and religion. And for the next hour, he tried to convert me. And he told me that he had a certain peace because of his faith in Islam, that if it was the will of God for him to spend the rest of his life in prison, he would accept it. And he wanted me to have that same kind of peace, that no matter what comes my way, I would be able to accept my fate with a dignity and patience and perseverance. And I thought to myself, what an ironic moment. My faith is largely based upon the writings of a man who wrote his letters as a prisoner. St. Paul wrote almost everything, almost the entire New Testament, in shackles. And here I was, the captor and the inquisitor, being told by a so-called enemy that he had a peace that could sustain him through times of trial, and he wished I had that kind of peace. He then went on to tell me that he thought that I wasn't following the commandments of Jesus, that I wasn't, to love my enemies and to not oppose an evildoer. And while I didn't necessarily take his personal challenge all that incredibly seriously, because he just said a second ago he'd try to kill me, what happened in that interrogation was a realization that I absolutely agreed with him. And I had no rebuttal. I sat silent for probably 5 minutes, and then I told him, I think that you're right. I think that this job compromises me and my ability to talk to you as a man. And I stopped the interrogation and I went and talked to my chain of command, and I told them that I just lost all my objectivity as an interrogator, and if they wanted to get information out of this man, they'd have to find somebody else. Because if I go back in that interrogation room, I'm going to want to talk to him just as a human being. And I'm going to want to talk to him about the cycle of vengeance that both he and I are caught up in, and try to find a way out, both of us. Because he was caught in an ideological system that told him he was justified to kill me. And I was a part of an ideological system that told me it was okay for me to kill him. And we both had the understanding that faith and conscience could provide the kind of peace to accept fate, whatever it is. And here we were, at odds. A guy I'd never met. So I went to my company commander, and I told him that I was going to apply for conscientious objection. And this was about 2 months before we redeployed to the States. And we left the prison in December, but before we did that, I had to live 2 months as a proclaimed conscientious objector, but still a rifle bearer and an interrogator, and I still had to go about my duties. And a lot of people talk about the fear of dying in a combat zone, and I have to say, and I've talked with a lot of other people who've been to war, and they've said they went through the same thing, is that I was so much more terrified of being a person who kills than I ever was of being a person, of the possibility of dying. We were getting bombed on a daily basis at the prison. Mortar attacks. A guy tried to ram a truck of explosives 100 feet from where I slept one morning. I mean, he was everywhere. One day, while in a convoy, we were driving slowly outside the Baghdad International Airport, and I pointed my weapon, as I always did, out the window of our armored Humvee. And through the sights of my M16, I saw the faces of 3 8-year-old boys that were 10 feet away from our truck. And I made eye contact with all of them. I thought to myself, are these little boys, are they just used to living in threat? Are they used to having guns pointed at them? What's going to happen to them? How are they going to remember me? How are they going to remember the eyes that they made contact with through the sights of my M16? I thought to myself, St. Paul says, be prepared always to proclaim the hope that is within you. The only thing that went through my mind when we left the prison walls was my sin. The people that I didn't have right relationships with. the 8-year-old boys who I made eye contact with through the sights of my weapon. And all I said during that time was, Lord, please do not let this trigger pull. And every time we concluded convoys, I would thank God that my rounds were still chambered in my rifle. And I'd count the fact that I still had 210. I didn't have 209, I didn't have 208, I had 210. Thankfully, I went home with 210. I'm not the usual case necessarily. And one of the huge issues that I had as a conscientious objector was simply knowing the fact that people, the Marines and the Tower Guard, they all had to bring home body memories. They all had to bring home the people that they were killing on my behalf on a daily basis. And what are they going to do? When we came back to the States, after I submitted my application for conscientious objection, one of my fellow soldiers, I had a bit of a reputation in my unit. My friends called me priest and Holy Father because I always kept the daily offices of prayer and always was found in the chapel when I wasn't at the interrogation center. One of my friends who had seen the worst in Iraq, he was an interrogator and an Arabic linguist also. One of his jobs once was to take the fingerprints of dead Iraqis in Fallujah after we decimated the city with aerial bombing and Marine strikes. He had tried to turn himself in once as a committer of atrocities, and the Army totally ignored him. And we're back in Georgia at Fort Gordon, and in a male latrine, he knelt in a toilet stall and asked me to hear his confession. And he said to me, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned, I've never confessed." He was once in a cafe seat like you guys. He brings back memories from Iraq that I haven't had to deal with. I have my own. But at the time that he knelt before me in a male toilet stall, he was taking 6 separate medications for post-traumatic stress disorder. And this is what average people who once sat in the chairs that you're sitting in go through. And the Army recruiters that I talked to 38 days after I turned 17 didn't tell me any of this. So first off, well, I guess it's kind of the end of my talk. I would like to emphasize that what you're doing in counter-recruitment is saving people like my friend from having to come back with those terrible memories, having to keep him from having to turn himself in for committing atrocities that when he was sitting in the chairs that you're sitting in, he never thought that he was capable of. I got out of the Army in May of this year, and leaving the Fort Gordon installation was one of the happiest and hardest days of my life. I was so happy to be able to live according to my conscience, but all the people that I'd gone to Iraq with were still there, and they're probably going to go back. And I guess that's kind of been a cross I've had to bear, a cross I've had to bear since leaving, which is why I do this, which is why I talk about it. I was speaking this summer in California, and one of my friends who I deployed to Iraq with came to hear me speak, and he's this huge bodybuilding type of guy, not real open with his emotions, and his face was just totally red at the end of my talk. And he came up to me and he said, "Thank you, because you say what none of us can say, because we're still in the system, and if we spoke out, we'd be reprimanded." He's not a conscientious objector, he's a conscientious person, and he knows what he did in Iraq was meaningless. That we were all persecuting poor people for 6 months, and we would get awarded when we came back to the States, and people would pin medals on our chests, and my friends and I we'd throw them into the closet, because no matter how many times a general came before us and said, "You guys restored America's honor, you've changed the face of Abu Ghraib, you led the way on the war on terrorism," we know the hungry people that were in our interrogation booth. So please take your accolades somewhere else, because no matter how many times you try to make us feel good, we know what we went through. So the work that you guys do in counter recruitment, it's saving people from having to go through that vacuum of meaninglessness, of having to have that burden. So I just want to congratulate you and help out in any way that I can. And you guys are helping. I'm kind of getting choked up now. Thank you. Thank you for bringing me here, for allowing me to speak, and for being a part of your effort to help keep people sane on both sides, and to keep the violence, keep people from having to participate in violence that's unnecessary. I want to entertain any questions that you might have.
And the reaction of some of your family members?
My immediate family has been really supportive. Both my parents are therapists, and so we've had lots of talking throughout the 8 years I spent in the military, and my whole family was on board and supported me. My extended family, not everyone knows, because my grandfather's history is definitely a source of pride in the family. So that one's an unraveling mystery. The question was, has there been any pressure from the military for me not to speak? I haven't felt any. I haven't really cared. But I've had people ask me questions like whether or not they think my phone is tapped. And I really have no idea. I'm one guy, and there's lots of activists out and about talking about their experiences. But not yet is the easy answer.
How difficult is it once you're in the service to become a conscientious objector?
I'm really glad you asked that question. It's incredibly difficult. I wrote a 26-page paper, 10-point font, single-spaced, for my application for CO. I was not going to get defeated. I had the opportunity of going to a great liberal arts university, taking classes in rhetoric. I'm a graduate student right now in playwriting, so writing is kind of my forte. And most people who were like me once when I was 17, going on the bayonet assault course and yelling kill, 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 and blood, 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 we think to ourselves, I don't like this. Why don't I like this? The Army has their own stereotype for COs, and it's white, upper middle class, well-educated, and they say clever with words. Because obviously the argument itself isn't substantive, they just are clever and tricky. I know the people who answer the calls for the GI Rights Hotline encounter this plenty of people who, in their heart, like they're objectors to war, but the ability to articulate it is really difficult. And so one of the really key things that if people want to help future COs, if people have writing ability that can help other people learn how to translate their stories into a written story so that they can express themselves in words, it's huge. I also had a friend in my unit who applied for CO shortly after I did, and we're of the exact same ethic. I came from a religious standpoint, he came from a secular standpoint, but we espoused the same things, we both read the same political books. He was treated night and day different than I was. Like as a Catholic Christian, if I had applied for CO back in Vietnam, I probably would have been summarily dismissed because I'm not Mennonite, I'm not Quaker, and that kind of bias was supposed to have been remedied by the current regulation of CO. But it's taken a different form now, and it's basically the difference between a person who has an ethics based upon politics and a more secular understanding of society, and a person who has a spiritual or religious understanding of society and ethics. And very early on in the process, it became apparent to me that I was the backdrop against which my friend Stephen was going to be judged. I was the coherent, religious, spiritual one, and he was the guy who didn't like George Bush. And I wrote another letter to his senator, or to his congressman in the state of Washington, outlining just like the bias that was a part of the process, and he's still fighting an appeal to get out. And he is an incredibly educated, articulate person as well. But the regulation, it states that the claim has to be religious, moral, ethical, and not political, philosophical, sociological. Whatever that means. The idea is that they're trying to find something that like existentially moves you, something that doesn't shift with policy. You have to be against war in all forms, and it has to be something that goes to your core. And objecting to, say, just the Iraq War, or saying that I think that I don't know, socialism is a better form of government, and so fighting for a democracy goes against my conscience. They don't buy any of that. But it's really ridiculous in the end, because you get a situation like my friend Stephen and I, who have the exact same ethic, but we just come at it from different sides of the coin. And I win, he doesn't.
How would you assess the morale of the soldiers there that you were around?
In my unit, when we came back from Iraq, I would say maybe a fifth at most. It was still idealistic about the mission. Like, we're doing the right thing. We're in the war on terrorism. The rest had all been turned into cynics, and a lot of drinking. Erupted when we came back, and some people were still. I mean, the terrible thing about it is that for people who weren't necessarily opposed to war, they felt such a vacuum of meaning when they were there. When we came back, they wanted to go again, so that they could have an experience that lived up to the legacy of their grandfather who went through World War II. And another thing that soldiers go through a lot, and I have to say I've gone through this myself, is that you have such an adrenaline rush while you're deployed. It doesn't necessarily have to do with any sort of ideology, like I'm really on board, but there's such constant motion and constant pressure and purpose and function that when you come back and people are out going to buy cheeseburgers, and daily life is going, like, what in the world is going on? And you almost want to get back into an environment that you just came from, because it provided you coherence and structure. And a lot of people come back with huge disdain for civilians, which is a problem that I have yet to understand how to solve. But most soldiers they cling to one another in returning, and try to find help through that. But yeah, I think we're reaching the end.
Well, Joshua's going to be here. We're here till 11. He'll be here to answer questions and talk with you one-on-one over some coffee. But for now, first of all, let's thank him.